The rope was already around the man's neck when the Apache chief spoke. Standing at the edge of Redstone Bluff, where the canyon wind cut through a man's soul like a cold blade, Chief Ahanu raised one weathered hand and silenced 40 warriors with the motion. Below him, the stranger knelt in the rust-colored dust, wrists bound behind him with rawhide, his sandy hair matted with blood from a wound above his temple. He was young, maybe 26, with square shoulders and calm gray eyes that refused to look away from the chief. That refusal alone had saved him from immediate death. Ahanu respected a man who would not break his gaze when death leaned in close. But respect was not mercy. The chief's voice rolled across the bluff like distant thunder, deep and measured, each word chosen as a man selects stones to build something that must last. He spoke first in Apache, letting the syllables fill the canyon air. Then, for the benefit of the stranger and the two white traders tied at the far post, he repeated himself in the rough English he had learned across 30 years of watching white men arrive, lie, and take. This land does not belong to you. My daughter does not belong to you. No Apache woman belongs to any man who rides in with empty hands and hungry eyes. He stepped closer, his moccasins silent on the red rock. She belongs to no man. This is the way of the Hawk clan. This has always been the way. The stranger, whose name was Callum Reeves, though no one here knew it yet, did not beg. He simply looked up at the chief and said, "I didn't come for your daughter, sir. I came because she was bleeding in the canyon and I couldn't ride past a dying person. That's all." Silence broke over the warriors like water over stone. And then something happened that no one on Redstone Bluff expected. From the cluster of women standing 30 yards back, a single figure stepped forward. She moved through the parting crowd the way a hawk descends, without hesitation, without noise, without asking permission. She was tall for a woman of the Hawk clan, with dark eyes that held the same quality as her father's. They did not flinch. A long gash ran from her left shoulder down her forearm, freshly wrapped in cloth strips that Callum himself had torn from his own shirt. Her name was Nasha, daughter of Chief Ahanu, the most protected person in the Hawk clan's winter territory. She stopped beside the kneeling stranger. She did not speak yet. She simply stood there, between her father's judgment and this outsider's life, and the weight of that position was visible on every line of her face. She was not afraid. She was something far more dangerous. She was decided. Chief Ahanu's jaw tightened. The warriors stirred, and somewhere behind them, in the shadow of the canyon wall, an older warrior named Dogquos, the man Ahanu had chosen to be Nasha's husband, watched with eyes that had gone very, very still. "Remove the rope," Nasha said. Her father did not move. "Remove the rope, father," she said again, "and then we need to talk." 3 days before the rope, there had been a rock slide. It came without warning, as all real dangers do. One moment, the canyon south of Redstone Bluff was quiet, just hawk cries and the scraping of Nasha's horse against the narrow trail. And the next, the cliff face collapsed like a sleeping giant rolling over. The sound was enormous, a grinding roar that swallowed the afternoon whole. And then there was only dust and the ringing silence that follows destruction. Nasha had been riding alone. She was not supposed to be. Her father's standing order was that she take 2 escorts whenever she left the main encampment. But Nasha had grown up with that order, and she had grown past it. though she had never said so out loud. She was 22 years old. She had been tracking, riding, and reading the land since she was 9. She did not need a shadow. The rock slide proved her wrong. Aye, not because she lacked skill, but because skill is not armor against the earth itself, deciding to move. Her horse threw her when the first boulders hit the trail. She struck the canyon wall and slid down the loose shale, her shoulder opening against a sharp ledge, the pain a white shock that pushed the air out of her lungs. She lay in the dust at the canyon floor, listening to the last of the rocks settle, and she was honest with herself for exactly 10 seconds. She was hurt. She was alone, and the blood soaking through her riding shirt was dark and fast. Then she heard hoofbeats. A single rider came around the bend from the north. Not Apache, that was clear from the sound of the horse's shoes on stone and the jangle of iron-fitted tack. Nasha reached for the knife at her hip before she was even fully upright. Her left arm screamed. Her grip was weak. She held on anyway, teeth set, because the alternative was lying there, waiting to be helped, and she had not been raised to wait. Callum Reeves pulled his buckskin horse to a sharp stop and looked down at the woman in the dust who was pointing a blade at him with a blood-soaked arm and absolutely no intention of lowering it. He had been riding south for 6 days, heading for the trading post at Marrow Creek. He was a farrier by trade, the son of a Scottish blacksmith who had come west and hammered iron in 3 different territories before settling in the broken hills of New Mexico. Callum had his father's hands, broad, scarred, patient, and his mother's tendency towards silence when other men would speak. He had seen Apache riders twice before on this journey, always at a distance, always watching. He understood clearly that he was a guest in a land that had not invited him, and he rode accordingly. He looked at the wounded woman's blade and did not reach for his own. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "You're bleeding badly. I have clean cloth and I know how to close a wound. Let me help you, or don't. Either way, I'll stay until you decide." Nasha studied him for a long moment. She was losing blood. The logical part of her mind, the part that her father had trained alongside her warrior instincts, was running the numbers, and they were not good. She could call for her escorts, but they were half a mile back and might not hear. She could try to ride, but her horse had bolted and left her. She could hold the knife on this stranger and bleed out in the canyon. Or she could make a decision. She lowered the blade 2 inches, not fully, just enough. "You touch anything other than the wound," she said, "and we will have a very different conversation." He nodded once, swung off his horse, and got to work. His hands were exactly as steady as they had looked. He cleaned the gash with water from his canteen, packed it with strips of his shirt, and wrapped it with a knot tight enough to hold, but not so tight it cut circulation. He did not speak while he worked. He did not ask her name or where she came from. He focused on the wound, the way a craftsman focuses on the thing in front of him. And Nasha, who had spent her entire life watching men perform for her father's approval, found this quality disarming in a way she could not immediately explain. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and said, "You should be seen by someone who knows Apache medicine better than I do." "I am Apache medicine," she said. "My mother's mother taught me." He accepted this without argument. She told him her name. He told her his. And then, because her scouts had finally arrived and burst around the canyon bend with arrows nocked and fury on their faces, the conversation ended, and the trouble began. old, thick in the chest, with hands that had killed 7 men and braided a woman's hair with equal ease. And he understood people the way a hawk understands wind. Not with love, but with perfect predatory precision. He had been arranged to marry Nasha for 2 years. Chief Ahanu had approved it. The clan elders had approved it. Every layer of protocol had been observed. There was only one problem, and it was not the kind of problem a man like Dogquos admitted out loud. Nasha had never approved it. She had never said no, because Ahanu's word in the Hawk clan was close to law, and she loved her father. But she had never said yes either. She had simply never said anything, and her silence had stretched over 2 years like a dry season, present, acknowledged, and never resolved. Dogquos watched the stranger being dragged in by the scouts, and he felt something he rarely felt. Concern that had nothing to do with Nasha's injury. He had seen how the white man walked. Not fearfully, not desperately. He walked the way Dogquos himself walked, with the even, unhurried step of a man who understood consequence and was not ruled by it. That kind of man was not harmless. That kind of man made things complicated. Chief Ahanu heard the full account from the lead scout, the rock slide, the wound, the stranger's intervention, and his face showed nothing. He was 54 years old and had governed the Hawk clan through drought, through territorial dispute, through the long grinding pressure of white expansion from the east, and his face had learned over all those years to be a wall. What happened behind the wall was his own business. He looked at his daughters, wrapped arm. He looked at the stranger who stood at the edge of the circle with his wrists not yet bound, watching the chief with those calm grey eyes. Then he looked at Dogquos. Something passed between the 2 older men. Not words, just a shared recognition. An outsider had touched what Dogquos was meant to have, that carried weight regardless of the circumstances. "What is your business in this territory?" Ahanu asked the stranger. "Farrier work, trading post at Marrow Creek." "How long have you been in this region?" 6 days riding from the north. "I pass through, I don't settle. I have no claim on any land here." "You touched my daughter." A pause. Everyone in the circle felt it. "I treated a bleeding person," Callum said carefully. "I would have done the same for anyone in that canyon, man, woman, Apache, or otherwise." It was the truth, and Ahanu knew it. He had built his reputation on reading truth from men's faces. But truth was not always the deciding factor in decisions that carried the weight of tradition, of pride, of a future son-in-law watching from 8 feet away. He ordered the stranger held overnight. Not harmed. Held. He needed to think. And more than that, he needed to watch. A man's behavior on his worst day told you everything. Nasha was escorted to her mother's fire for treatment. She went without argument, which surprised the escorts, because Nasha almost always argued. But tonight, she sat quietly while her mother cleaned and repacked the wound properly, and she stared at the fire and thought about a pair of steady hands and a man who had not once asked for anything in return. Her mother, a small, quiet woman named Liluye, who had been watching her daughter's face for 22 years, said nothing for a long time. Then she said, very softly, "The way you are looking at that fire is not the way you look at things that don't matter to you." Nasha said nothing. Liluye nodded slowly, as if an answer had been given. And outside, in the dark, Dogquos sharpened his knife against a flat stone and thought about how men came to accidents in the desert and how some of those accidents could be arranged. By morning, Word had traveled. In a Hawk clan encampment of 212 people, secrets moved like water through sand, quietly, inevitably, finding every crack. By sunrise, everyone knew that the chief's daughter had been brought home wounded and accompanied by a white stranger. By mid-morning, they knew the stranger had treated her injury personally. By the time the council fire was lit for the elders' discussion, the story had been weighed, flavored, and reshaped by 40 separate tellings. Nasha sat outside her family's lodge and listened to the elders' voices rise and fall inside and said nothing. She had not been invited to the council. Women of the Hawk clan could speak at the fire in matters of community, food, water, children, winter preparation. But decisions involving the law of the clan fell to the men of rank. She had disagreed with this for years. She had never said so at volume because she loved her father and because she understood that a war fought on every front at once was a war lost. She had been choosing her battles carefully. Today felt like the day she might need to choose a large one. The elder named Dohassan, who was 70 and had the dry wisdom of desert stone, was speaking. She could hear his voice clearly through the lodge skin. The stranger broke no law. He entered no forbidden ground. He helped the chief's daughter in a situation where she needed help. These are the facts. The situation existed because she rode alone, said another voice, Tokquos. He had been invited to the council. He was not an elder, but the arranged marriage gave him standing. If she had followed her father's order, no stranger would have touched her. A silence that carried weight. You are blaming my daughter, Ahanu said. His voice was flat and careful, the voice he used when anger was present but leashed. I'm stating what occurred, Tokquos said. What occurred, said Dohassan, is that a white man came into our territory, helped one of our people at personal risk of misunderstanding, and is now being held on a bluff. We should be careful about what that action teaches us about ourselves. More silence. Nasha pressed her ear against the lodge wall without shame. The council went on for 2 hours. The conclusion was unsatisfying and inevitable. The stranger would be released. He had done no wrong. But he would be escorted to the edge of Hawk clan territory and watched until he was gone. And Chief Ahanu would speak to his daughter about the riding alone problem. Firmly. What the council did not address, because such things were not addressed at council fires, only felt and carried and acted on in private, was Tokquos. Nasha knew this. She also knew something else, something she had not told anyone. When the scouts had arrived in the canyon and surrounded Callum Reeves with drawn bows, he had not moved. He had not grabbed for his rifle. He had not run. He had stayed where he was, hands open at his sides, and he had looked at the scouts with those grey eyes and said clearly, "She's hurt. Let someone see to her first." In Nasha's 22 years, she had never once heard a man prioritize her safety over his own. She stood up, dusted off her leggings, and walked toward where they were keeping Callum Reeves. She had a question she needed to ask him before he was escorted away. She had been raised to get her answers directly. He was sitting under a cottonwood tree at the north edge of the encampment, wrists free, a guard 10 feet away, who was watching him with the focused attention of a man who took his work seriously. Someone had given Callum water and dried meat, which he had eaten methodically. He was rebraiding a broken section of his horse's bridle, with the focused patience of a man who fixes things as a matter of habit. Nasha walked directly to him and sat down across from him. The guard stiffened but did not intervene. The chief's daughter went where she wished. Callum looked up, set the bridle down, and waited. "In the canyon," Nasha said, without preamble. "When the scouts came. Why didn't you run?" He considered this seriously, the way he seemed to consider most things. "Because running would have made me look guilty of something, and I hadn't done anything wrong. Most men run anyway. Most men are afraid. You weren't afraid." He met her eyes. "I didn't say that. I said I hadn't done anything wrong. Those are two different things." She studied him the way she studied terrain before crossing it, for depth, for stability, for hidden dangers. What she found was a man who did not perform ease. His calm was genuine because it was built on something internal, not on the opinions of the people around him. She had met very few people like that in her life. Her father was one. She herself was another. She had not expected to find it in a traveling farrier from the north. "You're being escorted out today," she said. "I know. Marrow Creek is 2 days south. The western trail is faster." He looked at her steadily. "Is there a reason you're telling me this?" She was quiet for a moment. "My father's people sometimes patrol the eastern trail, less so the western." Another pause, longer this time. "That sounds like you're doing me a favor," Callum said. "It sounds like I'm giving information to someone who helped me when he didn't have to," she said. "I pay my debts." He nodded slowly. Then, without calculation, without the easy smile men used when they thought they had gained advantage, he picked the bridle back up and returned to his braiding. Conversation over. No angling, no pressing. She had said what she came to say, and he had heard it, and that was enough. Nasha stood to leave. "Your arm," he said, without looking up. "Change that wrapping tonight and pack it with anything your grandmother left you. The heat of the day will pull at the edges." She paused. "You know Apache medicine." "I know wounds," he said. "I've stitched enough horses to read soft tissue." She almost smiled. She caught it before it reached her face, but just barely. "I'll keep that in mind." She walked back toward the lodges. Torquos was watching from the shadow of the food stores, arms folded, face arranged in its careful, neutral expression. But his eyes were following her, the way a hunter follows a deer that has begun to move in an unexpected direction. He had been watching her talk to the stranger for 4 minutes. He had counted. That night, Callum Reeves was escorted to the western border of Hawk Clan territory and released. The escort watched him ride south until the dust of his horse disappeared into the scrub. Torquos, who had arranged to lead the escort personally, watched the longest. He noted the direction. He filed it away. And on the ride back, he spoke to 2 of his closest men in a voice too low for the others to hear. 8 days later, Callum Reeves was jumped on the Marrow Creek Road, beaten by 3 men wearing no identifying marks, his horse taken and left in the dirt. He survived because he fought hard and because a passing cattle hand found him before the sun finished the job. He did not know who had done it, but when he lay in the dirt, looking at the empty road, he thought of grey eyes and steady hands, and a woman who paid her debts. And he thought, someone sent a message. He just didn't know what he was supposed to do with it. 12 days after Callum was escorted from the territory, Nasha's wound had healed cleanly, and a trader named Ferris came through the encampment with goods and gossip, the way traders always did. He mentioned, between discussing the price of salt and the condition of the southern road, that a young farrier had been set upon near Marrow Creek. Beaten badly, horse stolen, Description matched a sandy-haired man of about 26. Nasha's face did not change. "Did he survive?" she asked, voice level. Ferris, who was old enough to know better than to read much into the question, said yes. The man was mending at the creek's trading post. Then he went back to discussing salt. Nasha walked away from the conversation with perfect composure, went to her mother's lodge, sat down, and was still for a long time. Then she thought about Tog Kwas, leading the escort. She thought about the timing. 8 days, just enough for men to ride south, do work, and ride back without being missed. She thought about the 2 men who had ridden back with him, who had been unusually quiet and had found reasons to avoid her eyes for days. She was not a woman given to assumptions. Her father had raised her to trace things to their source, the same way you trace a river to its headwater. You follow what you can observe, what she could observe. Tog Kwas had led the escort. Tog Kwas had returned later than expected. Tog Kwas had watched her conversation with Callum for precisely 4 minutes, and she had seen his jaw set. What she could not prove, any of it. She went to find her mother. Liluye listened without interrupting, which was her nature. When Nasha finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out if I'm right first." "And if you are?" Nasha looked at the fire. "Then I'm going to have the conversation with father that I've been not having for 2 years. Her mother was quiet again then. "He loves you. He will hear you." "He loves me," Nasha agreed. "And he loves the Hawk clan's traditions. And he respects Tog Kwas's fighting ability. And he has already given his word to the arrangement." She paused. "I don't know which of those things he loves more." Liluye reached out and touched her daughter's hand. "I do," she said, "but you have to be the one to make him choose." The confirmation came 2 days later, not from testimony but from accident. One of Tog Kwas's men, a younger warrior named Etu, got drunk on trader's whiskey and said too much to a friend who was not as loyal as expected. The story reached Nasha through 3 people in one afternoon, each version slightly different, but all pointing to the same source. Tog Kwas had arranged it. 3 hired men from a settlement 2 valleys east. No Apache hands on it. Important detail that. Nothing that could be traced back to the clan. Clean, careful, anonymous. Except it wasn't. Nasha sat with this knowledge for one night. She held it the way you hold a hot coal, knowing you can't keep holding it, knowing you have to put it somewhere. In the morning, she went to her father's fire. Chief Ahanu sat at his morning fire alone, which was the hour he preferred. The encampment was stirring, children beginning their noise, women starting the cook fires, men checking horses and weapons in the pale early light. But this hour before full sunrise was his, and everyone who knew him well enough knew not to interrupt it. Nasha sat down across from him. She did not apologize for interrupting. He looked at her the way he always did when she arrived without warning, with mild exasperation and the kind of love that does not need to announce itself. "You have something to say," he said. Not a question. Tog Kwas had the farrier beaten. The fire crackled. A horse stamped somewhere in the dark behind the lodges. Ahanu's face did not immediately change, but something behind his eyes did. A subtle shift, like a stone wall being tested and finding the test serious. "That is a very large accusation," he said. "I know. I wouldn't bring it to you if I wasn't certain." She laid out everything. The timeline, Etu's drunken confirmation, the hired men from the eastern settlement. She laid it out as her father had taught her. Facts first, interpretation after, emotion last. Her voice was steady. She felt the emotion. She felt it like a stone in her chest. But she kept it behind her teeth until the facts were done. When she finished, the silence was long. "Why would Dogquos do this?" Ahanu said finally. "Because he watched me talk to Callum Reeves for 4 minutes and decided that was a threat to what he'd been promised." "You spoke to the stranger alone?" "Yes." She held his gaze. "That is a separate conversation, Father. Do not fold it into this one." He was quiet for a moment, which meant he was deciding whether to accept that boundary. He was a chief. He was not used to being told what conversations to separate. But he was also Nasha's father, and he had spent 22 years respecting a mind that worked as clearly as his own. "Go on," he said. "The farrier was an innocent man. He helped me. He accepted his escort without argument. He had no claim on anything within our territory, and he had done nothing to earn violence." She leaned forward slightly. "Dogquos didn't beat him because of the clan. He beat him because of jealousy, and then he covered it, so no Apache hands were on it, because he knew you would not approve." Ahanu looked at the fire for a long time. "If this is true," he said slowly, "it means Dogquos acted without my knowledge, in a matter involving the clan's relationship with outsiders, for personal reasons." He paused. "That is a serious breach." "Yes." "It also means I was wrong about him." "Yes." He looked up at her then, and she saw something in his face that she had never seen clearly before. Not weakness exactly, but the weight of a man who had built something good over a lifetime and was looking at a crack in the foundation. "I also need to speak to you," he said, "about the farrier." "I know." "You care about this man." She let the words settle before she answered. "I care that a man who did right by me was punished for it. I care that I would have bled out in that canyon without him. I care that he had calm hands and an honest face, and he said true things." She paused. "Whether that is more than gratitude, I cannot say yet. What I can say is that I am 22 years old, and I have never once been asked what I want. I have always asked. You have always asked me to tell you what I need," she said. "Food, horses, medicine, weapons, training, those things, yes, but not this." She spread one hand open between them. "Not who I am in my own heart, not who I would choose." The fire popped. The camp was waking fully now, the sounds of morning flooding in around them. Ahanu was quiet for a long time. "And Dogquos?" she said finally. "I will deal with Dogquos," he said. His voice had changed. Harder now, the chief rather than the father. "He cannot do this kind of thing and carry the trust of the clan. I will not allow it to stand." "And the farrier?" He looked at her steadily. "I need to think." It was not yes, but it was not no. And Nasha, who had been reading her father's silences for 22 years, heard in it something that felt, carefully, dangerously, like the beginning of an opening. The problem with powerful men who feel their grip loosening is that they often tighten it in ways that cannot be undone. Dogquos did not know what Nasha had said to her father at the morning fire. He did not know about Etu's loose tongue, about the confirmation that had traveled through 3 people in one afternoon. He knew only that for the past 2 days the chief had been watching him differently, with a flat, measuring quality that Ahanu usually reserved for men he was deciding about. This frightened Dogquos in a way he would not name. Not because he feared the chief exactly, but because Ahanu's good opinion had been the architecture of his entire standing in the clan. Without it, Dogquos was still a strong man, still a skilled warrior, but he was not a future chief. He was not the man the clan would turn to. He was just a man, and he had spent too long building toward more than that. He decided to force the resolution that the council had not provided. He went to the two elders he knew best, men who had known him since childhood, who valued the old order of things, who were made uneasy by Ahanu's occasional bends toward leniency. He told them he was concerned about the chief's daughter, about the foreign influence, about the tradition that governed the Hawk clan's integrity. He said nothing untrue. He simply framed truth the way a man frames a door, emphasizing the opening rather than the wall. Both elders agreed that the arranged marriage should be formalized. The longer it waited, the more uncertain it became. They went to Ahanu. Ahanu received them with perfect courtesy and the flat, unrevealing face that had become its own kind of message in recent days. He listened. He thanked them for their concern. He said he would consider. They left, satisfied. Ahanu sat alone for a long time after. Meanwhile, Nasha had been doing something that no one was watching for, because they were all watching the larger drama. She had been sending a message. The trading post at Marrow Creek had a mail system of sorts. A rider who carried letters north twice a week to the larger settlement at Carver's Pass. Nasha had found Ferris the trader before he left the territory and given him a folded letter written in careful English, which she had been taught by the missionary school she had attended for 2 years as a girl before deciding it was more useful to her at home. The letter was brief. "You were attacked for helping me. This was not the will of the chief or the clan. It was one man's jealousy, and it was wrong. I am sorry for it. If you are well enough to travel, ride north to Redstone Bluff in 2 weeks. There is something being decided here that I think you deserve to be present for. Come under no flag but your own." N. She did not know if he would come. She did not know if she was wise to ask. What she knew was that every story she had ever been told about a woman's life had been a story of things happening around her, decisions made on her behalf, paths chosen for her, with the best of intentions by people who loved her. She was changing the shape of her own story. She was doing it carefully, with her eyes open, knowing the cost. 2 weeks was enough time for Dogquos to finalize pressure on the elders. It was also enough time for a man with calm grey eyes to decide what kind of man he was. He came. Callum Reeves rode into the Hawk clan's outer territory on a grey morning when the sky was the colour of old pewter, and the wind came down from the north, carrying the first suggestion of the season turning. He was on a different horse, a stocky roan he'd traded for at Marrow Creek, and he rode with his rifle holstered and his hands visible, making himself as readable as he could to whoever was watching from the rocks. They were watching. He could feel it. He stopped at the base of Redstone Bluff and waited. Scouts came down within 10 minutes. 4 of them, faces hard, arrows ready. He sat completely still and let them come. "I'm Callum Reeves," he said. "I had a letter from a woman named Nasha. I'm here because she asked me to be." The scouts exchanged looks. They confiscated his rifle, tied his hands, and brought him up. What he found at the top of the bluff was not what he'd expected. He'd imagined a quiet meeting, a negotiation perhaps. What he found was an entire clan mid-argument. The 2 elders had brought their formalization request back to Ahanu that morning, this time with 4 more men standing behind them. They wanted an answer. Dogquos stood with them, his face composed and his eyes doing something that reminded Callum uncomfortably of the moment before a horse decides to throw you. And there was Nasha, standing with her mother just at the edge of the gathering, watching her father being pressured from all sides with the focused stillness of a woman who was waiting for the right moment. Ahanu saw Callum arrive. His expression gave nothing away, but his gaze tracked the farrier with the alertness of a man filing information at speed. "This man," Tokwas said, voice carefully controlled, "should not be here." "He was invited," Nasha said, stepping forward. Silence crashed through the gathering. "By who?" one of the elders said. "By me." Tokwas's careful expression finally cracked, just slightly, a hairline fracture at the jaw, but it cracked. Ahanu raised one hand. The gathering stilled. He looked from Tokwas to his daughter, to the stranger at the edge of the crowd, and something behind his eyes went through a visible reckoning. A man who had governed well for decades, now being asked to govern the thing closest to him. "Tokwas," he said. Not a question, just the name in a specific tone. Tokwas met his chief's gaze. "Did you arrange for this man to be beaten on the Marrow Creek Road?" The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause. Tokwas held Ahanu's gaze for 3 seconds, 5, 8. Then he said, "He was a foreign man who had touched what was promised to me." It was not a denial. Ahanu's face did not change, but his eyes went through something profound. The final closing of a door that had been slowly swinging shut for days. He had hoped he was wrong. He had been careful not to hope too hard, because he had learned over 54 years that hoping too hard for something to be untrue was just another way of lying to yourself. "You are a man of the Hawk clan," Ahanu said. "You do not act on private jealousy, using outside violence, and call it defense of what you were promised. You were not promised a right to harm innocents." He paused. "You will go to your lodge. You will wait for the council's judgment." Tokwas did not move immediately. Something in him, the same part that had arranged the beating, the part that had spent decades calculating advantage, was running through his options. The crowd was watching. The elders who had backed him were watching. Every calculation was happening behind his eyes at once. Then Nasha stepped fully into the center of the gathering, and she said it. "I choose him, Father." Nobody moved. "I choose Callum Reeves. Not because he came here for me. He came because I asked him to witness what is happening in my own life. But because he is the only man I have met who helped me without wanting anything in return, because he has honest hands and an honest face. And he did not run when running would have been easier." She turned and looked at Tokwas directly. "And because I will not spend my life beside a man who answers jealousy with hired violence against someone who did nothing wrong." Ahanu looked at his daughter for a long time. Every elder, every warrior, every woman at the edge of the circle was watching the chief's face. And then Callum Reeves, who had been standing at the edge of this gathering in tied wrists and borrowed silence, said something no one expected. "Chief Ahanu," he said, his voice quiet and level, "I didn't come here to claim anything. I came because a woman I respect asked me to come, and I owed her that much after what she did for me in that canyon." He paused. "What she chooses is hers to choose. I'll accept whatever you decide, but whatever you decide, it should be what she wants, not what was arranged before she was old enough to have a word in it." Ahanu turned from his daughter to the man in front of him. He turned the way a man turns, who is measuring not for a verdict, but for character, looking for the gap between what a man says and what he is. He found no gap. Togquos left the gathering on his own feet, and no one stopped him, and no one followed him. That was its own verdict. The council fire that night burned until past midnight. Chief Ahanu sat at its head and listened to every voice in turn. Elders who valued tradition, warriors who respected the arrangement, women who had never been asked their opinion at a council fire, and gave it now anyway, because Nasha's words in the morning had opened something that did not want to close. He listened to all of it with his full attention, the way he had always led, from patience rather than impulse. Callum Reeves sat at the far edge of the fire's light, outside the council circle, as was proper. He had not asked to speak. He sat with his knees drawn up and watched the fire and let the Hawk clan decide its own life. Nasha sat inside the circle, which was itself a departure from tradition, and nobody asked her to leave. When all voices had been heard, Ahanu spoke. "My daughter has never once in 22 years made a decision I was not eventually glad she made," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried, the way the chief's voice always carried. She learned to track before she could ride. She learned to read before she was taught. She has never made a claim that was not true, and she has never made a promise she did not keep. He paused. I should have asked her years ago what she wanted. I did not ask, because I thought I knew, and because it was easier to follow a path already chosen. He looked across the fire at Togquos's empty space. That was a failure of mine. Silence. The arrangement with Togquos is dissolved. He answered this council's question with an admission of violence against an innocent man, and he will face judgment for it accordingly. He looked at Nasha. You were right to bring it to me. I should have seen it earlier. Nasha held her father's gaze. Something in her face that had been braced for a long time released, slowly, carefully, like a fist opening. As for the farrier, Ahanu turned toward the edge of the firelight where Callum sat. You came into Hawk clan territory twice. The first time uninvited at the site of a rock slide. The second time invited by the chief's daughter in a matter involving her own life. He studied the young man's face. Both times you behaved with honor. You did not lie. You did not claim. You did not threaten. And you did not run. He was quiet for a moment. I have met very few men of any nation who could say that. Callum met the chief's gaze and said nothing. He understood this was not a moment for words. She belongs to no man, Ahanu said then, and his voice carried the old formal weight of declaration. This has always been the way of the Hawk clan. A woman is not property. She is not an arrangement. She is not a gift given between men for the benefit of men. He paused, and something in his face went through a quiet change. Pride and loss and acceptance, all moving through him at once, visible in the firelight. She belongs to herself, and herself alone can choose. He looked at his daughter. If you choose this man, Nasha, then it is chosen. He will be judged by what he does from here, not by where he was born or what blood he carries. That is the only fair measure. Nasha rose to her feet. She crossed the council circle, which women did not do, and nobody stopped her, and she stood before her father, not kneeling, not bowing, simply standing as she had always stood, fully upright, fully herself. And she said, "Thank you." Ahanu put one hand briefly on her shoulder, a small gesture, the kind that says everything. In the days that followed, Togquos faced the clan's judgment, a formal stripping of his warrior rank and a period of exile to the eastern settlement where the men he'd hired still lived. He accepted it without dignity, which told the clan everything it needed to know about who he had always been beneath the careful surface. Callum Reeves did not move into the Hawk clan territory uninvited. He rode to Marrow Creek, completed his work there, and returned north. But he returned 4 months later, in winter, and he did not arrive empty-handed. He brought tools, iron, skilled labor that the encampment had been needing, and he worked for 3 months at the clan's forge with his sleeves rolled up and his broad, patient hands making useful things. He did not claim, he did not perform, he simply showed up and worked and was present. On the 48th day, Nasha came to the forge in the afternoon. She sat on a fence post and watched him work for a while. He worked. Eventually she said, "My father wants to know if you intend to stay." He looked up, set down his hammer. "Do you want me to?" he said. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the canyon on the first day, measuring depth and stability and hidden dangers. She found the same thing she had found then. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. He picked up his hammer. He smiled, and it was the first full smile she had seen from him. Unhurried, unperforming, simply there. "Then I'll stay," he said. Outside, the winter sun moved through the cold sky over Redstone Bluff. The canyon wind came through the cottonwood branches and lifted the smoke from the forge upward, thinning it into the vast blue air. Below in the encampment, children ran. Women moved between the fires. An old elder sat at his doorway watching clouds, as he had watched them for 70 years, reading in them whatever truth the sky was offering. Chief Ahanu stood at the bluff's edge, his favorite place, his thinking place, and looked out at the land his people had kept and loved and fought for. He thought about all the things he had declared over the years, laws and boundaries and truths and expectations. He had said his daughter belonged to no man, and he had meant it, but he had not always lived it. He had let tradition and convenience and the quiet pressure of men with ambition build an architecture around her that she had never agreed to. He had called it protection. She had endured it. She had grown within it anyway, the way trees grow through stone walls. And then she had stepped forward at the edge of a bluff, with a rope around an innocent man's neck, and said, "Remove it." Not because she loved the stranger yet, but because it was wrong, and she had been raised to name wrong things. He had raised her well, better than he had known, better than he had trusted. The wind came up from the canyon, and he let it blow. Below him, faint and warm, the sound of a hammer on iron. Chief Ahanu looked at the land his people loved, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that something had been made right. Not perfectly. Nothing was ever perfect, not in this life, not in this land, but right, true. The kind of right that does not need to be defended because it does not sit on someone else's silence. His daughter was free, as she had always been meant to be. And that was enough. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, drop a comment below with your country and the time. I want to know where in the world you are. Until next time.